Hi, welcome back to my channel. I don't know how long this video is going to be, but I feel like I definitely want to just do a little video on the idea of healthy relationships, and like how I feel like is a good way to build them, but also how you can be in. So I'll just talk about healthy relationships. I feel like it'll kind of make sense when I start talking. But yeah, like how sometimes I feel like, to begin with, the way that a lot of people I find can get into unhealthy relationships is when you have this mindset of like, we have this as human beings, we have neuro pathways in our minds and are programmed a certain way. And this can be perpetuated through, you can have negative cycles that are perpetuated through trauma and sort of self-sabotage due to trauma. Nothing's ever for no reason. Often people don't self-sabotage for no reason. It's a trauma, it's related to some incident or issue that you have, repressed or conscious. And we have like it's kind of this, obviously neuro pathway most travelled is the kind of easiest thing that you revert back to in terms of and so if your most travelled neuro pathway is a toxic relationship, for example, or your most long-standing relationship has been toxic, you will revert to a toxic relationship because you're programmed to do that. And I've been watching a few videos on healthy relationships, as I usually get most of my information from other people's videos. But it was all about the idea of not deluding yourself. Like, in terms of making a healthy relationship, I think that is one thing to be aware of for a start. But it's so important, I find, and was mentioned, to not delude yourself. I find, in like apart from like in a relationship, past what is necessary. Like sometimes you do have to just kind of like say you don't, it's not an ideal situation, but sometimes, let's just be honest, in things like work, if you have a toxic boss, you have to just like find some way of coping with it. Like and often it's in a workplace, and there's other people that can kind of there's a structure that sort of makes it okay for you to sort of just handle their passive aggression, and there's boundaries and limits on what is actually okay in terms of abusive behavior that might come out. Like, they're not gonna particularly rage at you. They might rage at you, but if it was that bad to the point where it was affecting you mentally, you'd be able to report them. So workplace is kind of one place that you can find toxic people and sort of navigate that. But in terms of healthy relationships within life and work relationships, I suppose, but it's about not deluding yourself apart from what is absolutely necessary. So that's kind of the forging a sort of like livable circumstance with people that you kind of encounter through things like work. Also not also to stand up for yourself in situations. We all have a valuable thing to say. Often everyone has something to say, I heard, but only some people like have a valuable thing to say. Some people just spout nonsense and it's literally like lies, and that's all they do. But obviously, who am I to judge? But at the same time, well, I'm saying I'm judging a bit, but there we go. But yeah, literally, if you have something to say in terms of, especially if it's like actually got some sort of moral to it and point, to stand up for like what you actually believe in. Why does my camera run out? Hang on. Right, so basically, and not only standing up for yourself, but not putting up nonsense in terms of whatever that means to you. Obviously, lack of truth, I suppose, lies, rage, abuse, anger. I'm not saying you can just choose. Sometimes obviously put up with abuse, because with toxic cycles that can be addictive, and there's trauma bonds and things that can be involved in terms of toxic relationships, I find. So it's not like your fault if you're being abused, and like, for example, you've got reactive abuse. Say if you're like triggered and you obviously get angry like anyone would, not your fault. But to aim towards the good, and kind of set boundaries where you can early on, and try and identify antisocial people, because often I heard that lots of people have a range of healthy sort of like, or just like spontaneous, devilish sense of humoury badness, and sort of like going off the rails and getting pissed up, and like having loads of fun. I think work hard, play hard kind of mentality, and also like a sense of like normality and sort of functional living. and have that sort of healthy balance. But some people like do take it upon themselves, if they've got a nice social personality, to bring havoc, and that's kind of their goal. But most people have like a healthy level in between of sort of health of like, you know, as I said. But if you have like a toxic relationships in your life, realizing you have a choice whether to actually tolerate them or cut them off or set boundaries. And when picking out like future relationships in terms of romantic even or friends or anything, I guess it's just about like assessing early on whether you feel like you can put up with them long term. And I wanted to address this idea of, I'm not talking about like, you know, I need to find a wife / husband kind of thing. I'm not anyway. But I mean, like, I was trying to quote like someone that, you know, is looking for a long term partner. Don't think I'm actually emotionally ready for a long term partner. In my stratosphere right now, I'm too young. But who knows? But I feel like I wanted to address the idea of how it's not like often toxic people are actually like super boring to be around, because they don't really have many prospects, and they just sort of like live this sort of like mundane lifestyle where they only really get joy from toxicity. And toxicity is pretty dull, if you ask me. But obviously some people enjoy it, but I find it to be quite dull, and they, you know, it's just what it is. And I feel like these people can project that level of boringness that they have in their lives on people that are healthy. And to address the idea of short-term spontaneity and fun versus long-term seeking longevity for not pissing around in like relationships and stuff. Like, I don't know, like I think there's nothing wrong with a bit of sense. And I don't think that's boring. If anything, it makes life a lot easier to cope with and deal with and manage and make in a bite-sized way, because you know, life can be extremely complicated, and you know, when you're surrounded by chaos and toxic people, it's hard to sort of navigate that, but when you're sort of away from them, you can see life a bit better. And it's like, I feel like if my life is going well, I often want to, it's a work hard, play hard mentality in my life, where, for example, if I've worked really hard at work or something, I really want to like go and have like a really, 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 really good night out or something, for example, to sort of like, you know, deal with that. Often like some of the most high times in my life have been where I've been working really hard at the same time. But in healthy relationships, I think it's just this sense of like safety that comes from the fact that, you know, I think people that have attachment problems and stuff, they can have like issues with and I think it is important in one sense to tread lightly, and not necessarily tread lightly, but move slowly in situations with other people to kind of assess. I think there's one sense of fate level of you meet the right people, and they're like, you know, in terms of coming across like the people that are supposed to be in your life and whatnot, because I do think there's a sense of like that I kind of look to in terms of relationships, and sort of like praying about people and stuff if like I'm not sure if they're supposed to be in my life kind of thing. That's something I personally do. It's not something that I'm advocating or not, but obviously do what works for you. But I think like lots of stuff like is actually okay in healthy relationships. Like, I think there's actually a hell of a lot of lee room, but and so that's why it's so much more fulfilling in healthy relationship. Like, obviously in healthy relationships, like there's so much lee room, I find, if someone actually has invested in you and actually cares about you, and there's that sort of mutual level. It depends, obviously all relationships are different, and some levels, like some relationships and friendships, they're so like surface level, but they still work and they're kind of very convenient. And you know, it might just be like a shopping partner or someone that you just sort of get on with, that you know you can spend a few hours with every like 6 months or whatever, and that's like a type of friendship, like a convenient one. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. I think they're actually really helpful and healthy to have in life to get you through like stuff, and they can really bring your mood up and really help like deal with life in general and just be great for that sort of stuff. But when your heart's in the right place, like obviously sometimes people drift apart for no reason, or obviously big fights ensue and you just have a completely different, you know, relationships can end for so many reasons. But when your heart's in the right place, and you don't split paths for whatever reason, because that's something different, and I think that's just nothing to do with having healthy relationships or not. That's just something that happens in life. Back to this sort of like who's supposed to be on live kind of thing. Because people do just wander out sometimes. I was having this conversation with someone recently, how it does suck when like you have a good friend and then you just find that you're just not probably on the same path anymore, and you've got to just, or they've kind of ghosted you or something. Like maybe not in a harsh way, but just kind of like not really in that place anymore. Like not too bothered, and maybe it's not been like an official cut off point, but you just have to sort of accept that and just be like, well, it's a time for me to sort of eventually I'll bring more people into my life, and obviously when one door closes another door opens, and that's something that you just have to accept in life, I find. But yeah, in terms of toxic relationships, like there's just so much bullshit in terms of toxic relationships, like projection and people, and like even like it's just conditioning, I find, from toxic relationships, in terms of that kind of prevent more healthy relationships and deeper healthy relationships at times, because obviously, don't get me wrong, relationships aren't everything, and they're one part and portion of life, but at the same time I feel like you can really improve your standard of relationships and sort of depth and comfortability and openness and lack of awkwardness and stuff with relationships when you are sort of healed from toxic ones. Because the thing about toxic relationships often is that you are sort of bullied often into submission, or the thing about toxic people is that they don't really have friends, they have people that they sort of like to dominate, and that's kind of the dynamic. So if you've sort of grown up around that, or you're used to it for whatever reason in terms of relationships or whatever, like they can't have friends. So I just think, they're being who they are, but it's a case of people that are actually healthy, even to like a level. Because I know we all have our like downsides, and like I'm not saying I'm perfect, but that's the kind of mentality that sort of evokes friendship. I feel like to have that sort of I'm not perfect kind of mentality. Not saying that anyone that thinks they're perfect doesn't deserve like good, healthy relationships. I'm saying that that level of humbleness, like I just feel like, you know, relationships, I feel like a lot of stuff can be, forgiven and forgotten in a healthy relationship, but then it's just about realizing the depth that you can, or the potential room for healthy relationships once healed from toxic ones, because you can just thrive on such a higher level. Because if you have like trauma or toxic pasts and or toxic conditioning from toxic relationships, it's just a level. I feel like it's just brain power that just doesn't need to be used. It's like a computer. Like your brain is a computer. It's not necessarily, you might have a virus on your computer, if you like to want to use that analogy, if you are stuck in a toxic relationship, and that sucks. And there are choices and there are ways to heal, and please get assistance if needed for support systems, and there are services available for people in, domestic violence situations and toxic situations and blah blah blah. But at the same time, it's a case of, and that's a way to break out of it, but when I'm going to get to the point now because my camera's literally about to stop recording, I feel like, but yeah, it's a case of like, yeah, reprogramming the toxic parts and making more room for the healthy. And even in terms of yourself, like it must impact on people's self-esteem and like, way that they think about themselves and energy towards themselves. And it's just a law of attraction level. Like once you heal from that stuff, you will attract more of that. And toxic people can't do that. Sometimes I feel like there's this level of bitterness and resentment that I have that I've had in the past, and that I think it was a healthy process for me to go through, I'm not gonna lie, when processing these type of relationships from the past. And I think you just have to process stuff at the point you do. But when you do like fully process it, it's like there's just so much to look forward to in life, I find, and it's just not about necessarily thinking that it's always going to be a certain way. There's always more for you. So yeah, thanks for listening. Bye.